Hello and welcome to F2 Fan 5000's FIA Formula 3 predictions for 2025. The main thing to remember for 2025 when it comes to Formula 3 is that there will be a new car. How does this affect the pecking order? Well, it should shake it up and it should be very unpredictable. However, because the teams are much the same as Formula 2, the 2024 Formula 2 season will give us a little bit of a clue as to how this might go. And generally, the Formula 2 season last year saw that the teams that had an advantage before, like Prema and ART, lost the advantage, while some of the teams that were a bit also ran, like High Tech, MP, Campos, they got a bit more closer to teams like ART and Prema. With that in mind, I want to go through this team by team. First team I'm going to look at, Dams Lucas Oil. They're taking over from the Genza Motorsport entry. I very much respect Genza Motorsport. However, I think Dams are a more serious competitor at this level of motorsport, and they're probably the longest surviving team in this series. They've been around, I think, since 1989. Their three drivers are Christian Ho, who is the Euro Cup 3 champion, or runner-up. I think runner-up from 2024. Returning driver Matthias Zagazzetta, and Formula Regional driver Nicolas Lecorte. Christian Ho, I think, is a very competent driver, very promising. However, it's hard to gauge because the Euro Cup 3 grid is a little bit spotty. Matthias Zagazzetta is a bit inconsistent. He's probably stronger than what we saw in 2024 because the AIX car is never really the best car. Genza. Nicola Lecorte, I don't have a lot of... he seems to be a weak driver. I'm sorry. So, Lecorte, I don't see him in the mix. I think Dams will be higher in the pecking order than Genza were. I don't think they'll be right at the top. I don't think their drivers are going to take them to the top, but I think Christian Ho will probably have a slight edge on Zagazzetta towards the end of the season. Zagazzetta is not a bad driver. Now, I'm going to skip AIX and we talk about Rodin Motorsport. I think this team is the hardest to judge. Their form with the ground effects car in Formula 2 was very up and down, very inconsistent. One week they're winning, the next week they're struggling in the midfield. So it's hard to say, but they potentially have one of the best lineups. Roman Belinsky is not a bad driver from Formula Regional. Louis Sharp is a GB3 rookie champion. He's a GB3 champion in his first attempt. And Callum Voisin is a very strong returning driver. That's a very strong lineup, but they're going to be reliant on Rodin Motorsport to get on top of that ground effects car. Will Rodin be able to do that? I'm not sure. Now, Van Amersfoort Racing are a very mid to back of the grid team. They have been consistently in F2 and F3, and I don't see that changing. And the driver lineup doesn't fill me with too much confidence. Santiago Ramos was slightly underwhelming in Trident last season. Ivan Dominguez is a decent midfield driver. Teofil Nal is probably the best driver they have. He's not bad, but I don't see the combination with Van Amersfoort and Teofil Nal bringing a lot of success, but they might have some good results. MP Motorsport. MP Motorsport are one of the most improved teams going from in Formula 2 from 23 going to 24. How does that affect them? Well, they have 3 drivers. Bruno Delpino, I'm not terribly excited about. He's not bad, but he struggled to make too much of an impression in Euro Cup 3, even though he had some decent results last season. But Alessandro Giusti is a very talented driver from Formula Regional, and Tim Tramnitz also shone in Formula Regional. I think that could be a dark horse pairing, Giusti and Tramnitz. I'd be looking out for them for some unexpected wins. I don't know about the championship. Possibly. Maybe outsiders. Going to High Tech. High Tech are one of those teams I think will improve in the pecking order. And although neither Gerard G nor Jos Dufek are highly rated, I think they will probably do better and will be higher up the order than people expect. As for Martinius Stenson, I think he will do well, but how well is the question. He struggled a bit last season. He struggled to make an impression. Can he reverse that around? I'm not entirely convinced, but as we've seen from him in 2023 in the Formula Regional European Championship, that he can be a very strong driver. So he's potentially an outside chance for the title. But considering how it went last season, I'm not too confident on that. Campos is one of those teams, coming to Campos, one of those teams that could be up and down, a bit like Rodin. I'm not terribly convinced of Campos at this level. I think Inthra is a better driver than what we saw at AIX last season. I think Boyer is a good driver, but maybe he's hit his ceiling. Solov is probably the strongest driver there. He's only just turned 18. I mean, I know it's his 3rd season in Formula 3, but he was only 16, only just turned 16 when he entered the sport, so I'm expecting he's going to have the jump on his teammates. We should get some good results from Solov, but I don't expect him to be a championship contender. As for ART, I have to have a bit of trepidation about ART because their Formula 2 season with the ground effects car was underwhelming. They have 3 good drivers, but Tuukka Tarpinen has shown in Formula Regional last year, when things aren't going his way, that he can struggle a fair bit, but he's also shown a lot of pace, especially in 2024 Formula Regional Middle East. So he's not going to be bad, but I'm not 100% convinced he's going to be a front runner unless things fall his way. Van Hoopen is slowly improving all the time, but I'm not convinced that he's going to be a front runner. James Wharton can be a dark horse, but it depends on ART and how they get their head around the Formula 3 ground effects car. The Trident team is probably the hardest team for me to analyse. They're very weak in Formula 2 and they're very strong in Formula 3, which is a bit hard to wrap my head around why. Last year they seemed to struggle with the ground effects car, although Richard for sure got a win with them. They've got a strong driver in Rafael Camara. Noah Stromstead is a dark horse. Charlie Wirtz, what can he do? He's a Formula Regional Oceania champion. 5th in the feature race at Albert Park last year, but other than that, no points. So, a big question mark over this team. If they have a strong car, Camara can challenge for the title. I don't know about Stromstead, but he'll probably be getting a lot of points. I really don't know about Wirtz. He's a bit of hard one to judge. But this team is hard to judge. I don't know why they're strong in F3 and weak in F2. And how they're going to translate that to the F3 ground effects car. That's a big question coming into F3 this season. Coming to Prema Racing. Now we know Prema struggled a little bit in 2024 with their F2 car. However, I don't think they struggled as much as some teams. And I think they have a decent lineup, but I'm worried about both Uga Chukwu and Brando Badoa. Currently, both these drivers are struggling in Formula Regional Middle East against drivers that are still in Formula Regional level, like Freddie Slater and Evan Giltaire. If Evan Giltaire and Slater are beating them, then I'm not convinced of them at the Formula 3 level. I think Prema can get on top of the car, the ground effects F3 car, and if they do, I think Noel Leon will win the championship. I have to back him. He's probably the best returning driver. Him and Voisin. I think Prema are a better team than Rodin Motorsport. I think he's got better teammates. Well, Louis Sharp's very strong, but I mean, Ukachuk with Badoa, there's a lot of talent in that team. You can't bet that Prema will be down for the long term. I think Noel Leon, I have to back someone, so I'll back Noel Leon. I think he's stronger than people realise. I think he'll go really well. But, you know, it all depends on how these teams get on top of the ground effects car that's coming. And most of all, I hope we're in for a very exciting season. Driver sum is the amount of laps that the driver did over testing, and then team sum. Right, team sum is the most important feature here. So, as we can see, Prema completed 586 laps. Trident completed 669. ART completed 657. Campos completed 700. High-Tech completed 667. MP completed 565. Van Amersfoort completed 553. Rodin completed 613. AIX completed 581. And Dams completed 481. Now, before I go on, I want to analyse that a little bit. That's a big gap between Campos and Dams. Dams are a sort of a team in transition because they were Gens and now they're becoming Dams. And even though Dams is a very experienced team, they're basically a new team, and they have the lowest lap count, and on top of that they have a very inexperienced lineup. And when I looked at this table, I realised when you look at the experience and you consider that you got a new car, then you have to consider that Campos, with this amount of laps completed, have to be in the conversation. Now, as we see, the driver that completed the most laps was Nikola Solov. He's completed 261 laps. Now, he's young, but he's coming into his third season in F3, and him and his team have a head start here, because not only did he do he's the only driver to crack the 250 lap mark, and his teammates have also gone over the 200 mark. ART is also another team where all three drivers have hit the 200 mark, and so have Trident. So there's another team. High Tech. High Tech have also cracked the 200 mark with Stenson, Dufek and Gerard G. So with each driver, and that means these teams have cracked the 600 mark in terms of laps, and that's just an amazing amount of data for these teams to analyse that new F3 car. Whereas, as you see, the other teams are sort of in the middle a bit, and only Dams are really at the back by themselves. The only team with less than 500 laps. And again, back to the experience, I noticed that all the teams except one have 2 rookie drivers and one second-year driver. So let me repeat that. All teams except one have 2 rookie drivers. There's a lot of rookies and 1 second-year driver. And the team that stands out is the team that did the most laps, Campos. So Nikola Solov is a 3rd season driver. Tzanapolin through Vuvazak is a 2nd-year driver, and Mari Boyer is also a 3rd season driver. And not only that, these 3 drivers are very experienced outside of F3 as well. They've all done a season of Euro Cup 3. Well, Nikola Solov has done on and off Euro Cup 3 for the past 3 years. Even this year in the Winter Series, he's done a race. They've all done Formula Regional Middle East. They're very experienced drivers, and I think that's going to play into the favour of Campos over these other teams. The experience and the lap count. Now, I've given here an average. To explain this, I know there's only 3 days in testing, but this is their average finishing position in the test. Now, I know you can't read too much into that, but obviously there's going to be takeaways, right? Now, there wasn't a day 4. I've put day 2 twice because I noticed day 2 was the only day when all the drivers were pushing, or at least day 2 was the morning and afternoon sessions. I think especially the afternoon session is when everyone was pushing the most, whereas on day 3 there was wet and some teams aren't pushing that hard. And on day 1, the morning session, a lot of teams were just taking it easy. In the afternoon, all the teams except Trident were pushing hard, but Trident were circulating around at the back doing slow laps for whatever reason. So I've just put day 2 twice to give it more of a weighting in this average. Now, and guess what? The driver that did the most amount of laps is the driver that also has the highest average finishing position in the practice sessions. Nikola Solov has finished in the top 10 5 of the sessions. Whereas if you look at the Prema drivers, Ogachukwu has not finished in the top 10 at all. And the best, Brando Badoa has finished in the top 10 once. On the morning session in day 3, finished as the 9th fastest driver. So this is pointing to maybe it doesn't mean that much. It's only testing. But on the basis of that, I'd say that Campos and Solov are ahead. Other drivers that look strong, Lawrence Van Hoopen, Tuukka Tarpinen, Mari Boyer, Roman Belinsky. They had generally their average finishing position was in the top 10. And there's other stuff here. But the main takeaway from testing is that some teams have more mileage, and you have to say 4 teams in it. I'm going to say 3. I'm going to say Trident, ART, and Campos look to be the strongest teams. I'd put High Tech in in that conversation, but I'm not as convinced of their driver lineup as I am of the driver lineups of Trident, ART and Campos. Speaking of Trident and Charlie Wirtz has finished every practice session on day 2 and 3. Right, remember on day 1, okay, look, Charlie Wirtz is ahead, right? But Trident were not pushing. They were doing a lot of slow laps. On day 2 and 3, Charlie Wirtz finished behind Stromstead and Kamara in all the sessions. He's finished 9th on the morning of day 2. He's finished outside the top 20 on the afternoon of day 2 and the morning of day 3, and he's finished 18th on the afternoon of day 3. In that time, you can see that Noah Stromstead has been in the top 10 3 times, and the other time he was 11th. And Rafael Kamara on day 3 topped the morning session, finished 3rd. So I feel like there's a gap there that Charlie Wirtz is going to struggle to match these two drivers in terms of the amount of laps they've done. It's much the same. Stromstead is the second amount of laps done. I think also Noel Leon looks to be the fastest of the Prema drivers. Again, this is testing. You can't read too much into this, but it's still there. And you can see the gap. Like Stenson, his average finishing position in these practice times is 10.9, whereas for Gerard G it's 16.6. Dufek is 18.3. You get the feel. And then you come to AIX, right? I talked about this before. Segura, his average position in these tests is 16.4 compared to 24.4 from Marinangeli and 27.1. So he's finished 2 tests at the back, plus 27, 28, 29, and only on the first day when other teams aren't pushing, he's at a 14. So you can see that there's a gap, a large gap between Segura and his 2 teammates. I think Reid is slower than Segura in every session as well. You can see the teams that are getting their drivers in the top 10 in these practice sessions. Like, look at this Roden team here. They're getting, except for the afternoon of day 2, when they're probably not pushing, unfortunately, that hard. All the other sessions, they're in the top 10. Campos, Solov's always in the top 10. Boyer's in the top 10. Intrafuvazak a couple of times. ART, their drivers are finishing in the top 10 a lot. On day 2 and 3, you got Kamara and Stromstead in the top 10. And Noel Leon finishes in the top 10 a fair bit. And I think Tim Tramnitz had been a bit up and down, but, we're not sure that they're always pushing, but he's second fastest in the afternoon, third fastest, second fastest. So maybe there's something to read into that. And again, these teams generally have done more laps in testing, and I just want to point out Dams, they look terrible. They, I said, a lot less laps than any other team. Van Amersfoort has 553. They still cracked the 550 mark, and Dams can't get to 500. I mean, maybe 481 is a lot of laps, but compared to the other teams, and I've even put the difference in kilometres and miles, just it's a little, and race distances, like this is they're 3.318 Grand Prix behind, or 1,020 kilometres or 634 miles behind Campos. I mean, it's a lot less data, isn't it? So that's generally it. I think you're looking at Trident, ART, Campos, maybe Roden, maybe Noel Leon and Tim Tremnitz and Giusti are going to get in the mix too. Of course, you can't read too much into testing, but it should be a very tight season, a very close, hard-fought season. Should be a lot of acrimony, probably a lot of crashes. There's a lot of rookies there. Doesn't mean that you're a rookie, you're going to crash, of course. Some rookies are very solid. That's the main point, so I don't see anything else more to say about Formula 3 in 2025. But hopefully the racing is good. I'm sure it will be. Formula 3 always puts on a good show. Always exciting racing. Looking forward to it. I'm sure you are too.